A very warm welcome, everyone, to the second in the series of masterclasses under the newly launched India Blended Finance Collaborative, IBFC. The IBFC Collaborative is an Impact Investor Council initiative supported by USAID to nurture the blended finance ecosystem. We aim to host a series of industry discussions and masterclasses along with our partners, through which we hope to help philanthropic and CSR organizations maximize funding and social impact capacity through blended finance. So before we move forward, I would like to request Mr. Ramraj Pai, CEO at the India Impact Investors Council, to share his opening remarks. Please, sir.
Thank you, Tiyakshi. It's a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to be here. Welcome all to the second session in our India Blended Finance Collaborative. As Tiyakshi also already mentioned, this is a collaborative which we have set up, supported by USAID and with a series of partners who are working with us. The whole idea of the collaborative is really to create a space where we can talk and educate market participants more about blended finance, help them ask the questions that they may hesitate to ask, conduct peer learning workshops where we can look at blended finance opportunities in specific sectors, bring to the market transactions that may be out there, but many people don't know about it. So essentially, the whole idea of the collaborative is really to create a platform of resources. And the resources could be in the form of educative materials. The resources could be in the form of peer workshops. The educative material could be in the form of research papers. Anything which can help the sector move towards thinking about how is it that we can increase, the impact of the philanthropic capital or the CSR money that we have. The entire concept of the India Blended Finance Collaborative came to us post the pandemic, when we realized that, from thinking about impact created per rupee of development funding, the pandemic told us that the need for capital is far larger and the need for impact is humongous. And therefore, there is a need for us to change the paradigm from impact created to impact created per rupee. And blended finance is something which can enable us to help our philanthropic or grant funding or CSR capital go far further and create far more impact per rupee. And that is precisely why we felt, as the IIC, the India Impact Investors Council, that we should create this capacity building platform. We should create this effort where we are able to help a larger number of people in the market understand this space. What exactly is blended finance? How does blended finance work? What are the kind of structures? As a CSR professional, as a philanthropy, how can you begin? Where can you begin? If you are a CSR organization or a philanthropy with interest in health, what are the kind of opportunities which are there in health or in education or in agriculture? Are there people who are actually doing transactions? What is the nature of these transactions? Can you look at some of these transactions to understand more detail? Is this something which has worked? What is the track record? What is the success? I'm sure anybody who's coming into this call will have lots of these questions. And the whole idea of the series of sessions that we are doing, initially virtually and soon physically, is really to answer all of these questions and essentially create that kind of a space where people in the market can meet each other, understand the space more, and hopefully over a period of time, participate in these transactions. So IIC is a not-for-profit industry body. So we are not a transaction advisor. We are not an investment bank or anything like that. So we are not here to sell any transaction or make any transaction happen. Our idea is to just bring all the players in the market, whether it is not-for-profit, whether it is philanthropy, whether it is other foundations who are interested, bring them together and see whether we can really increase the impact per rupee. That's the whole sense. We had the first session, I think, about a month back. Every month we are having one of these sessions where we had talked about broadly a masterclass or a 101 introduction to blended finance. I think we had a bunch of partners last time, including IP Global and Samhita, who kind of worked with us in that session. And this time it's really our privilege and pleasure that we are collaborating with the British Asian Trust on the entire space of pay for results. And I think this is a very, very important space. And this is a very, very important topic. Because, and I've myself in my past avatar run what I would want to believe was a reasonably good CSR foundation. So there is always a question that we are obviously always paying for results. So what is this whole idea of paying for results? What is the concept of paying for results? How does pay for results tie in with blended finance? To sort of answer these questions, take you through, what this particular part of the market, which is pay for performance, is all about. What are the nuances? How does the market work? What are the building blocks? What is the track record? How have transactions performed? What are the transactions in the market? How should you, as a CSR professional or as a philanthropy, think about it? I think we have a fantastic, panel of speakers who are going to start off by giving you a quick introduction to the concept, look and showcase to you some case studies. And also then we will have some practitioners from the market also talk about some of the structures or some of their experiences. And I guess towards the end, we'll also sort of give you broadly some kind of a playbook in terms of how you as an organization or as a foundation should think about it. So that's the plan of the day. We want to keep this interactive. I know we always say this and everyone says it, we want to keep this interactive. But at least I can say that for the most of the sessions that we do, we either do try to get people to ask questions, through their own direct presence on the platform or through the chat box. We will try and keep it the same this time also. So feel free to shoot all your questions in the chat box. We will have from time to time short sessions of questions and answers, which we will be taking. So genuinely, we would want to keep this interactive. So feel free to reach out and ask the questions. And whenever we do see some really interesting ones, we will attempt to try and bring you on the screen so that you can ask your question physically and in person. So with that kind of quick introduction, let me end and hand over the mic back to Tiyakshi to take the conversation further forward.
Thank you so much, Ramraj. And as you rightly said, we are looking forward to creating awareness and platform and to work together with many more organizations and partners as we build IBFC. I would now like to introduce our speakers as well as the agenda for the day. Today's agenda is basically divided into two key sections. The first is an introduction to pay for results, a masterclass and discussion with the British Asian Trust, which will help you understand how to utilize pay for results as a strong tool to mobilize social impact. The next section covers the flow of the pay for results model from a funder's perspective, basically, as we have a set of industry leaders analyzing their key insights. We will also be conducting two short Q&A sessions and interact with the participants during the masterclass, as Ramraj said that. I urge you all to please put forward all your questions in the Q&A chat box. Our masterclass partners today is the British Asian Trust, which was founded in 2007 with the focus to tackle widespread poverty, inequality, and injustice in South Asia. They have been global pioneers in the social finance with a strong track record of driving successful collaborations and applying social finance approaches to solve economic and social challenges in South Asia. Without further ado, let me introduce our speakers. We have Anushri Parikh, Social Finance Manager at the British Asian Trust with 13 years of experience in corporate social responsibility, public policy and not-for-profit sector in India and the UK. Joining her from the British Asian Trust will be Ms. Abha, who is one of the founding members and leads the social finance vertical across South Asia. During the masterclass today, we will also be having some industry experts, like I said, representatives from the JSW Foundation and Indusland Bank sharing their side of the story for pay for results. I would again like to welcome all of our speakers and our participants and now hand over the discussion to Abha to take the presentation forward. Please, Abha.
Thank you, Tiyakshi, and sort of good morning from London. I know it's Friday afternoon for you, and we've got to keep this as exciting and as stimulating as Ramraj said to ensure that we don't lose you during the next couple of hours or so. So what I'm going to do is set the scene for pay for results. I'm going to hand over to Anushri, and at any point we would welcome questions. So the aim is not to talk at you. There's nothing more boring to be like lecturing adults. I know children have to sit through classes. Hopefully as adults by now we're having conversations. So I'm going to treat this as a conversation, not as a lecture, and hope you have the same spirit. And so do stop us, pause, and we'll try and pick up those things on the chat and try and answer them live as well. I'm told I have lots of graphics on this that are going to come and shine through this page. So I'm going to try and do my best with this. So bear with me as I do this. And I'm, of course, now faltering. There you go. Right. So firstly, before we talk about pay for results and results-based financing and all the jingles and things about bonds and other kinds of names and tags, let's just talk about what business as usual for most of us is. We start by saying that we want to make change happen, impact happen. We usually, what happens is that usually, and not everybody does this, is we then need an activity list of things that need to happen for that, a list of deliverables, outputs. We want so many classes delivered or so many trainings given. And we give the funds upfront to the project partners because they need that capital to do their work. And then we expect an outcome, which we look at a report. Some people look at the reports to get the money out, some people don't. And so typically the focus in that kind of funding from historical sort of what we know from lots and lots of funders is on activities, because outcomes come later. And the time of the money and the outcomes is not a direct tie. While it is the expectation, it's not what moves the needle in terms of the cash between the donor and the program. And pay for results is the same piece of work, but it slightly works differently, and you start from a different place. You start by saying, I want to achieve results. And you start by paying for outcomes as against for activities. Now, this is a really critical thing because not all outcomes can be achieved. You might want to change the world, but you may not be able to measure it. You might want to do away for the impact of climate change, but if you can't measure your outcome, you can't pay for that outcome. So we're talking about measurable outcomes, measurable results, a really critical, and I'll underline that point a lot because we'll come back to that quite a bit. By paying for outcomes, you have to price it, and someone's got to take the risk or the working capital that's required to make those outcomes happen. So the point of difference that we come in from is we try and understand which outcomes can be paid for, how do you pay for them? And then there's a bunch of nuance which we'll come into. How do you price an outcome? Who does the working capital? Do you always need working capital? Can the partner provide it themselves and you pay later? How do you work around some of the regulatory barriers that may not enable you to do this? And how do you do it better? And maybe milestones or other forms of payments which might help. So that's the sort of beginning, a scene setting of where we are in evolution of what our day-to-day business is, which is for many funders, the business of giving away money for doing good. But how does that money work? And how do you make sure money that doesn't do good is used for other purposes? So there could be underutilization here, which could be an interesting conversation as well. So we can talk about that as we go on. Just a little quick sort of summary of where we are in India. India has been a pioneer for this sort of pay for results. Clearly, we are ahead of the game. Everyone knows the Educate Girls DIB. We then had a social success note with Varthana, which are led by MSDF and other colleagues. The QEI DIB, which BAT with several partners, MSDF, UBS Optimus, several global funders started. Now we've closed this year with very, very good results. Utkrisht, that USAID and other partners led. We had the Haryana Pay for Success program. We have Matilda, who will be talking to you about that. We had the Skill Impact Bond. We have JSW Foundation, an outcome funder, that talking to you. We've got the Bharat EdTech Fund, which is a fund, not a pay for results, not an impact bond, but really taking the principles of pay for results. And then we have other funds that are upcoming in the market. So clearly the market likes these projects, and these sorts of multi-partner, multi-sector, sort of multi-provider, multi-million-dollar projects are taking off in India like nowhere else. Some of the biggest transactions are also coming out of India. So really, there is a certain first mover advantage India has to set the template for this. And you are the partners with whom we set those templates. So we're learning and as we do it, so we're building the ship as we sail. But part of that sailing is also sort of taking a degree of how do you make this better as we do it as well? How do you make sure you meet the tailwinds and don't make mistakes that perhaps other markets have made? So in low and middle income countries, that's where India strikes. We are definitely ahead of most others. So quick, you might wonder why are people doing this? And I have sort of 4 reasons why we see the increased interest for this. Donors want to spend better. Ramraj picked this up. COVID-19 meant there was smaller, that funding is tighter and funding is being spread over many more causes. Sustainable development goals remain a target, and really funders are key to see that their dollar or their rupee spent has better value for money propositions. And value for money is a big conversation we come back to often in this. Are we getting bang for our buck? Why are we getting bang for our buck, and why are we not? Also, government regulations really focus on impact, and that's, of course, clearly always a big driver. Implementation partners like to be paid for outcomes. They want to be doing long-term social change work. They don't want to be doing short-term outputs. They want to change the way education is delivered or skilling leads to employment. And these tools really enable that. And we see a huge interest from nonprofit and social enterprise partners for these sorts of tools. And finally, the improvement in evaluation, and here's where India is really doing very well. The ability to evaluate an outcome enables you to lead a product like this. And so those sorts of innovations have also enabled us to do it in education and skills. And that in turn enables us to pay for an outcome as against an output. So with that, I am going to move into a slightly different sort of narrative on this as to the why and the how. And I'm assuming someone's picking up chat because I'm not right now, but very quickly I'm going to move into how we think about this at the British Asian Trust. But you might have other ways of doing it. The way we do it is like this. We start with the impact that we want to make. So if you are in education and you want to focus on learning outcomes, we start by saying, how do we make sure we enable learning outcomes? India has most children in school. The issue seems to be in learning outcomes. How do we enable that? So the starting of impact first, tools second is a sort of guiding principle for us. So we don't say, here's our hammer and we're going to find a bond and we're going to drive it at any solution. We start by saying, here's the problem we want to solve and what kind of a solution would be interesting in this? What would change business as usual in that issue? So for example, if there's a sticky problem, women aren't being trained in mainstream skilling programs, or women aren't getting jobs. How do we solve that sticky problem using an approach and a rigor that might change the conversation and indeed the impact that you could have in that sector? So that's the first thing. What's the problem? And is that problem going to benefit from this sort of a lens? We then try and understand whether financial incentives are the bottlenecks. Is it that not enough money is being paid for that outcome per outcome needed? Is it that the money is going for the wrong parts of the outcome? It's incentivizing the wrong thing. So the saying we always go back to is you pay for, what you pay for is what you get. So if you're paying for training and not for ensuring the person is in a job, you'll get training. You won't get that person into a job. So that what you pay for, what you get is a really big thing. What are we paying for in our programmatic costs? And is that really linking into outcomes? And finally, we would then select the right tool. The tool comes at the end, and the financial incentives and the kinds of structures we build into that, the sort of carrots and sticks, as we call them, only come later because we need to understand first what the problem is. We also ask some questions. Is this about scale and efficiency? Are we going to generate evidence and learning? Is it worth doing this work? Will it affect policy? Will it change the way program is delivered so that actually you can have a much more transformative impact? For us, doing singular deals, it costs us as much time and money to do a singular deal as it does to do these multi-partner deals. So we really are keen on some of these larger transactions. So these sorts of questions, the sort of principles you see on the right, are really critical for the kinds of deals that British Asian Trust get interested in. We don't want to do something that perhaps could be done better through philanthropic means, because philanthropy is a very straightforward tool to have social impact. But if by changing that tool, you actually have a bigger impact and you change the way the paradigm works, that's a very important part of the work for us. And we really get excited about those sorts of areas. So here's a bit of a framework because, we always like the sort of academic frameworks on this stuff. But very quickly, if you look at a sector, so now you could have a nascent sector, let's say within education, you could have a nascent sector that's more towards the edtech space, primary education, more towards a sort of, evolved space where funding, nonprofit activity has been going for some time. We look at that sector and we start looking at some parameters. Is there, for example, evidence on outcomes and pricing at all? Are there products and sort of delivery standardization, or actually you need innovation? It could lead to a very different product depending on where you are on that. Are you able to benchmark any of this? Can you say, okay, we've looked at results here, we've looked at historical results, and here are some benchmarks that are going to enable us to design this? is government policy and budgetary allocation really concentrating on this sector? It really helps because then your outcome framework can come from governments. So let me use a very simple example. The SDGs lay some very simple outcome principles out. That helps to make some answers. And then finally, the most critical part is, are there some excellent service providers with whom we can work on some of this stuff? Because this is not about setting up new organizations. It's about strengthening the capabilities or the abilities of these organizations to have impact. Now, depending on where we land on the left, we might do 3 different kinds of things. In some of the nascent sectors, we might be looking at a pay-for-results tool that's building evidence, where we want to get the data out. We want to have rigorous evaluation in the future. We could be looking at assessment of where financial incentives will help. Bharat EdTech, which Anushree will talk to you about, is a case in point over there. We might be wanting to improve efficiency. We might be wanting to price an outcome because nobody knows what the outcome actually costs. And there, it's a really exciting place. So we sort of work on what's called price discovery of the outcome, or the innovation in the delivery, or what we call process innovation as against product innovation, where the process innovates in a way that you get better value for money on it. And we want to be able to show that under a P4R or a pay-for-results structure, the project is able to deliver better results because there's a performance manager and other sorts of interventions like that. And there, the Quality Education India Impact Bond is an example where we have worked on that. And finally, there could be a very evolved market where policy is aligned and where we want to look at scale, systems strengthening. And there we could be looking at very different structures where governments are part of that pay-for-results piece. And you're looking at how governments are able to improve. We're able to partner with government to improve some of the inefficiencies that they are really, really focused on. So depending on the state of the market and the sector and the parameters that we've laid out here, we would build very different tools. So the first thing to say, and we'll go back to this a few times today, there is no one tool. The tool is what you make out of it. And it depends on what you're bringing together, the ingredients for that recipe. It's not one recipe and that's set way to make it. Everybody does it slightly differently. You just need to be thinking about how you want to be solving what you're trying to solve. Are you feeding people or are you giving them the meal of their life? Depending on that, you'll be doing something very different. That's it from me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I sort of whistle-stopped my way through lots of data and numbers and frameworks. So pause. I'm happy to pause now and get questions from you.
Yeah. So maybe, Abha, I will maybe start off by asking some of the questions from my side. And, maybe my questions are all going to be very, the Aam Aadmi type of questions, the very basic questions, the foolish questions that, sort of. So, as I was just mentioning briefly in the beginning, I used to run a sort of foundation, not a very large foundation, but maybe an outlay of say 10 to 15 crores. And we didn't pay for results, but we ensured that the results happened. And that is the part of the oversight that we as a good high quality execution organization drove. So we would think through the theory of change. We would really look at it. We would figure out what the manning is, where are the issues, what's going well, what's not going well. So at the cost of sounding pompous, I believed that I was running a high quality organization, which is supposedly delivering on some outcomes, or we have a good sense of, where we are going. So, and I would want to believe that there are several in the audience, otherwise who also would want to believe the same thing about the work that they are doing. And I'm sure everyone's doing. So give me a sense as to why should somebody transition from that model into something like this? Is, I think, going to be a very, very critical question, because essentially here what we are saying is that you get paid in a way, and you can maybe explain, the structure. I would suggest 2 things. One is you can just in a very dumb way explain a simple structure, how it would work, starting from step 1. And I know that we'll talk about that a little bit later. And I think the other bigger question is, why is it that this is important? And is this something that we should do everywhere? Or are there specific spaces where we should look at more pay for results? Okay. Sure. I think
two questions.
Start off with, and then we can take more questions.
It's a great question. We all as professionals want to have impact. So the first thing we do, as Ramraj said, when you run a foundation, is ensure you read the reports, work on the MEL, and ensure your staff are really monitoring, going to the teams, making sure. So the first answer is it's not either or. It is not that you should change everything you do to pay for results, or that what you were doing is not right. It is an and. It is giving you an additional tool for impact for places where you don't find your business as usual helps. So let's say you've had partners who are working in education, they're giving you great data, but you're finding, for example, that certain populations are not being served. Or you're finding, for examples, that they're giving you great data on attendance, but you're not sure whether children are actually learning in those programs. Or the data you get there, you aren't able to independently verify them. Now, there are places where you have, and most professionals on the call will have that problem coming up as they manage portfolios of organizations. You'll have, 70% of your portfolio, you'll say, okay, bog standard, we think the results are good. 2025, either within that, you'll be seeing challenges, or you'll be seeing emerging challenges, climate, other things, where you feel, I need to apply a different lens, otherwise I won't get it. The other thing is you might be paying for something.
Yeah. Should I say that the pay for results will work because all of the parties are more motivated to be solving the problem? I mean, and I'm sorry if I'm asking a very stupid question, but do you think that will bring more alignment, or people will think more deeply about the problem, particularly the execution partners and other people on the field?
I'm going to bring Abhishek in over here from JSW, who is, of course, I think, Abhishek, I'm bringing you in early here. I don't know whether you want to turn your camera on. I think you should answer that question because you've done skills forever and you are working on an impact bonds.
I'm just asking the most dumb questions, but...
Ramraj, no question is a dumb one. It's the one we talk about all the time. So Abhishek, over to you. I feel you'll answer better than I will.
Sure,
I think
sure.
it might be.
So hi, so Ramraj, good afternoon all. So I think it's a great question. These questions came to us also when we were, entering into this space of impact bond. Why? What is the difference it's making? I think the learnings that we had, we were running a skill program since 2008, but we ventured into impact bond into 2021, and for 14 years learning. So I think the kind of what sailed us through this is. First of all, definitely bringing in more serious partners in the game. That's something, helped us taking that. And second is what innovations we are looking at. Third is a scale. We were also looking at achieving scale. So I think when you have to achieve scale, you have to look at, more innovations and also bringing in rigor in the system, in the process that you're doing. Because, for very long, if we do certain interventions, we are also, there's no scope for innovation and we continue doing that. And we were doing that. But this helped us bringing in, and probably after this learning of the bond that we are part of, we may do it very differently as JSW Foundation. And we have good funds also. We may do it on our own differently, may partner with some organization and scale our operations to a different level.
Got it.
Yeah, let me give you the example. And Abhishek pointed to many things, the rigor, underlining the rigor on that, Ramraj. When the UK healthcare system was funded on the basis of, doing your job as against reducing patient waiting times. And when they changed the deliverable to changing the amount of time a patient was waiting to be seen, suddenly you saw the healthcare system respond very differently. So when you have the right incentive or the right outcome, and that's a very keen and a very easy outcome to measure. I don't want patients to be waiting for months and months to be seen. We want them to be seen immediately. You suddenly have a transformative impact. But even to sometimes emerge at that outcome framework, you need some of these nascent deals because you could also be doing the wrong thing. You could be incentivizing the wrong thing. So that you have equal degree of care on that. So hopefully those questions will be answered, but I will turn to Anushri in the second half to go into some of the structures to help. Any other questions on that? And thank you, Abhishek. You did it better than I did.
Okay, before Abhishek goes, I want to ask, are there some areas where you will not use pay for results? Let me ask the question the other way around.
Yes, absolutely. Where we think grant will work better. So mental health, for example, right now, or in some areas of child protection, there could be areas where we don't have the link between input and outcome, but we know that those areas of good work need to be done. We might have to continue life skills. Everybody knows it's a critical part of empowerment. If we aren't still able to design the attribution of the activity to the outcome, you need a little bit more work there because attribution becomes a critical part of
What you're
payment.
telling me, Abha, is wherever the ambiguity is lesser, you
Yes.
sharpen the project and you
Yeah.
push for better quality and larger scale outcomes by aligning the entire ecosystem towards the goal. Let me, before
Correct.
we go on, one more question, Abhishek and Abha. For as an execution, so let's say I'm a not-for-profit on the ground, I'm executing, and I was doing my normal projects there, money was, I'm sure all the due diligence was happening. Now you've suddenly come up with this new animal where you're telling me that unless you do X, then you will get Y. How should I, as a not-for-profit or an NGO or, maybe I'm a small trust or, I'm just somebody running it in maybe a few districts in Rajasthan or wherever it is. How should I relate to something like this? Because effectively now I am in a way under the scanner, because I mean, earlier also accountability was there. It was not that accountability wasn't there, but now you're basically telling me that, my hair is going to get more gray because I have to deliver much more sharply than I was. Earlier also I had to deliver. But now it's going to be linked to the money that I'm going to get. How has the ecosystem sort of looked at it? And I'm asking these very global macro questions, and I know we'll get into the detail a little later, but I think this is also something that we could just maybe get some views from the two of you.
Okay, firstly, I'm going to bring Matilda, and she turned her camera on, so I think she wants to say something. So I will bring her in a second. But I'll give you a quick 2-minute answer from my end. The aim is not to transfer that risk to delivery organizations. The aim is that there is somebody who comes and takes the risk of the working capital. The aim is that the delivery organizations are freed up to innovate to get to the outcomes, things that they may not have been able to do in delivery as usual, which allows them to transfer that risk of failure to the investor or to the upfront working capital provider, enabling them to improve what they've done. Because sometimes in grant, and I often think about this, in grant, you're too afraid to tell your funder when something goes wrong. But your investor is on the same side as the table as you. He is invested in your success, or she is invested in your success. That investment of the funder in your success changes the dynamics of the way the funding works, Ramraj, and it is like magic. And here's where I'll bring Matilda in. Matilda, over to you.
Yes.
I was asking stupid questions.
No. They are very relevant questions, especially when we're talking about large scale impact or disruptive impact, right? So like you rightly said, from an NGO perspective, the type of monitoring and evaluation that you need to incorporate for larger projects, for me, one size doesn't fit all. It's not necessary that what a smaller NGO or even a larger NGO, it depends on what type of impact we are looking at. Whether we're looking at large scale problems at a national level, right? Which can be replicable and scalable, not only in that particular district or location, but using local context or state level context can be then replicated. That technology innovation can be taken to a larger audience and a larger beneficiary or a population, or to solve a problem. So not necessarily that every NGO should be looking at these type of models or impact bonds, saying that why am I not there in that space, right? But yes, if you put a step back, right, from an NGO, if you have a great proof of concept, right, you have a great theory of change that you believe in, it will make during a runway year, and then go and collaborate with like-minded organizations, be it philanthropic capital or CSR, to structure a model which can, be a multi-year, because the challenge today with a grant making proposition is that it's not patient, right? And some of the problems in our country, which are pressing problems, they are higher gestation period. They are not band-aid solutions that we can, you can come up with a solution and it can solve the problem. Right. You need to have that systemic lens, right? And for that, you need a larger actors playing as part of the entire model, be it a very strong research, innovation, new technology you bring on the table. You are talking about somebody committing or taking the downside risk. In case of a typical CSR, they tend to be a little bit conservative. They are like, we want to see an outcome for every money that we put, in as part of the CSR funding. That's where philanthropic capital, which is a little bit unrestricted, can come in and pick up that downside risk. So I don't know whether I have addressed your question, but I would largely think larger issues when it comes to education, health, wash, right? Your water and sanitation, skilling and livelihood. How do we skill for tomorrow, right? Because the way the entire landscape of the job, opportunities is changing drastically. How do we gear up today for maybe a decade from now? So I would look at it from that perspective.
Great, Matilda. I think we're going to stop here now. But what I request is, Abha or Anushri, as you're continuing, there are several terms that we use in this session. Like we spoke about the risk funder and some of those other, I think before we go ahead, it may be useful, Anushri, depending on where you are on the slides, to just give maybe a quick sort of a one slider in terms of where does the CSR or philanthropy come in? Where does the risk funder come in? How does a basic structure kind of work? And then I think we can kind of take on. There are other more nuanced questions that we may want to take up a bit later, but I just thought that it may be useful to just, get both Abhishek and Matilda to share some of their thoughts. And also, this is a easy way for me to also get some clarity on some of the things that I'm sure many in the audience may be having. Over to you, Tiyakshi or Pragya, whoever's sort of handling it. Tiyakshi, are you going forward with it now?
Sure. I think we will move forward with Anushri taking over. We'll take up some of the questions that the participants have put up in a while.
Okay, there's a lot of buzz in the chat, and I do definitely want to sort of answer some of those questions. I'll try and answer some of those as we kind of go through this. But if not, then let's definitely circle back, because I think some of those are very interesting questions, right? Okay, so my job is to now take you through some of the structures. It's going to get a bit technical. I'll try and sort of not make it like mumbo jumbo, but it's interesting and it's relevant to understand the structures a bit more, because
sorry, I'm butting in. Anytime it's getting too mumbo jumbo, I'm going to come in.
Please do but having said that, I do think it's important to understand this, because I think there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding when it comes to some of these structures, right? So let's get into it. Sorry. Okay. Before I get into specific structures, I thought it's useful to just look at the key levers or principles of any pay-for-result tool, right? So whether it is a DIB or it is a grant or it is some of the other things that I will cover, you will realize that you're playing around with these 4 elements. There are a few more elements. I've simplified this because this is more relevant for today. You could add a government engagement in this, who is paying for the outcomes as well. But let's just look at these 4, right? There's obviously proportion of payment, which is dependent or linked to results. If you link almost all of it, or are you linking some proportion of it, which is meaningful, or you're linking a low proportion to it. So that's one sort of parameter. The second parameter is independent evaluation. So the evaluation, and again, you will see, like when I present, most pay-for-result tools always have independent evaluation, because that is, the most rigorous way and the most objective way of basically saying that, yes, you've met an outcome, right? And the degree of rigor can vary. So the biggest question I get asked always is, I don't have a control group, or how do we even constitute a control group? Because it's like running a program or running, going in a car race, but trying to change the wheels at the same time. We can't do this, right? So, which is fine, right? It doesn't always have to be. So depending on what is that rigor, whether you're able to attribute or not, you can get different structures. The third is the extent to which the implementation partner is bearing the risk. And I saw a question about this in the chat box. Yes, there is some amount of risk sharing or risk bearing. Now, certain instruments take that totally away from implementation partners, and the onus or the risk will rest on the investor. In other cases, where the implementation partner is able to bear the risk, if they're large enough, well established enough, then you can have a risk sharing agreement, right? Where you give them some upfront and the rest of it comes on results, etc. But there is no rule of thumb to say that, this has to happen. And I think one of the most common myths that I've come across is that a DIB moves the risk to an implementation partner, which is not true, which I'll come to later. And your fourth lever or your fourth parameter is performance management. Now, like Ramraj said, I think all our projects in the development sector have a degree of project management. We report on progress, we report on timelines, milestones, activities, budget utilization. Performance management takes it to the next level to say that, are we actually helping our implementation partners achieve those outcomes? Are we troubleshooting? Are we innovating? Are we giving them relevant data in real time and feeding that into their program design so that they're able to pivot, right? So it's a slightly more intensive and hands-on activity. Now, depending on what you do with these four, you'll get different types of structures. And like Matilda said, there is no right or wrong. It is what works for you, what is fit for purpose, right? So no good or bad, no right or wrong, but there are trade-offs, and it's important to understand the trade-offs. As you move from the smaller orange sort of square to the larger square, the trade-off is between rigor and simplicity or complexity, right? As you move out, the rigor may drop, but the complexity is also dropping, so it's becoming simpler, right? And vice versa. And again, like I said, no value judgment. It is not a one glove fits all. Globally, and we've adapted this framework obviously from some global research that has happened. That research has shown no two DIBs are the same. They are always customized and they're always contextualized, right? So this whole idea that this is a very rigid way of financing development is not really true. For India, obviously a non-negotiable is compliance, which is right at the bottom there, which is a non-negotiable. So whatever we do, it has to be compliant with the relevant regulations, whether it's Section 135 of Companies Act, which is your CSR Act, or it is FCRA or any other regulation, right? And it has been done, and we will kind of come to it. So I'm going to move on to the structures now, but do remember these four parameters, because on all slides, you will see elements of these coming in. Okay. We're going to do an impact bond first, a development impact bond, to be very clear. I will first take you through the structure. I have some of my colleagues who will also share relevant links in the chat box for you to go and read up. The idea is not to kind of deep dive into the technicalities of it, but just give you a good enough sense of what a typical structure looks like, which then obviously, can be customized. Okay. So we start with an investor and the implementation partner, right? The premise is that the outcome funders want to pay for outcomes. The implementation partners have to deliver the outcomes. Like we all said, they need money, and most of the implementation partners are non-profits. There are obviously for-profits as well. Fair to assume for this, we are talking about non-profits. They need upfront capital to implement the activity, right? While we are all focused on outcomes, obviously somebody needs to pay for them to actually execute the activity. That's where the investor comes in. In this case, you have now moved the risk from the implementation partner to the investor, because the investor is giving upfront working capital to the implementation partner. Implementation partner's money, in a lot of cases, is not linked to outcomes. In certain cases, they can be, and that's again a negotiation in the transaction. But the theory is that 100% working capital is given to the implementation partner for whatever they want to do. You trust the implementation partner, which is why the selection of implementation partner is critical. They have a model where you believe that there is enough evidence that their model is going to lead to impact. It also changes the power dynamics, right? And this is something that's an underappreciated aspect of a DIB. See, normally when you do grants, you do activities, you do milestones, then we manage, okay, you've achieved X milestone, I'll release one tranche. You've achieved Y, I'll release another. Like Abha said, for the implementation partner, it's very difficult to plan its theory of change and its work around these micro modules of payments coming to them and that constant reporting. In all of that, the actual innovation and rigor, the actual focus on delivery may sometimes get lost, right? So here you're saying, I trust you, you take the money, I've selected you for a reason, go implement your project. Now, because it's a DIP structure and we want to make sure that the outcomes get met, I will also give you additional help as a performance manager. Now, this performance manager can be the investor himself or herself if they have the capability, or it can be a third-party organization. The role of the performance manager is to do all the day-to-day monitoring that we usually do with grants. But like I was saying, it takes on a degree of intensity because they help implementation partners problem solve, troubleshoot, improve their models. They share data, they share insights with them, right? Based on all of on these two aspects, the money from investor, the help from performance manager, your implementation partner goes and delivers the intervention. The users or the customers or the beneficiaries obviously, derive the benefit. Now the question is, how do we know that they have derived the benefit? That's when the evaluator comes in. It's an independent evaluator. They will go, they will measure the results, and they will say that, yes, this has been met, it has been met to this level, or this has underperformed. Based on the results and the evidence, objective, independent, verifiable results, the outcome funder pays the investor the money back. And because the investor took that upfront risk, it also kind of gives them a small reward for that risk taking, which is the returns, right? Now, I also saw a question in the chat box around when are the returns paid out, right? And again, no rule of thumb. Each transaction has a different cycle. It is a negotiation between the investor and the outcome funder. But broadly speaking, I think, there's only so much patience that people will have on both sides, on the investor side and on the outcome funder side. Very long periods of, sort of payouts are something that, generally people avoid. And also from an India perspective, the outcome funder also, if it's a CSR funder, has demands on utilization, on that annual budgets, etc., which the law has created. So, but it can really vary from a transaction to transaction, but it's generally reasonable, and it's a result of the negotiation between these two. So it's never unilaterally decided. I have some examples of the impact bonds in India. So there's Educate Girls, which was a first, then there's a QEI and Skill Impact Bond. I'll take up some detailed case studies on these, but I'm going to...
Sorry, if I may just come in here. So basically, the way I understand it, and I'm seeing some questions from bankers here, you're basically saying that the execution here by the implementation partner, you have great clarity in terms of what needs to be done. You've already established exactly what needs to be executed. And therefore, as an investor, this becomes almost like a regular business kind of company. So the implementation partner, in a way, what is it that the risk that the investor is taking? The risk that the investor is taking is that the implementation partner may not be able to deliver. So to have that confidence that he can deliver, one is obviously their people, their managerial capabilities, that is one. But the bigger thing is, do they know what is the problem and what exactly has to be done to deliver the outcome? So basically, it is a question about using impact bonds in places where there is great clarity in terms of exactly what is needed and what is needed to be able to deliver that outcome. Would I be right in saying that? Is that the kind of situation where pay for results would work better?
Yeah, so we just did some learnings around the QEI bond, and we're now realizing that established interventions, which have shown evidence of outcome in the past, reduce the risk for the investor, but they require innovation, process innovation or innovation in delivery, either to become more efficient or to scale, right? So not very new, untested interventions. You could do that, but then obviously the risk is higher, and therefore the return.
Yeah, got it. So thanks.
Anushri, just a quick time check. Pragya here. Yes. I think we may need to skip to the 2 case studies instead of the 3 structures so that we have ample time for the conversation also with the speakers. Just a heads up.
Sure. I think, Pragya, maybe we can just take an additional 5-10 minutes. I think the flow is going well. Let's take 5-10 minutes, unless the speakers, if that's okay with
sure.
Abhishek as well as Matilda, we can maybe take additional 5-10 minutes, because I think this is kind of flowing quite nicely now. Is that okay, Abhishek and Matilda? Yeah.
I'm fine.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to try and breeze through some of the other structures. I think we will share this, and there's a lot of material that's also available. The second structure that we want to cover is an impact guarantee. People also call it a reverse DIB, right? And the Haryana early literacy program was an example of this, and we'll let Matilda kind of speak about that and the experience. But the logic is, instead of the risk investor paying upfront, right, the working capital for the implementation partner, the outcome funder only pays upfront, right? And this is very helpful because normally your outcome funders are philanthropic organizations, or they could be governments, or they could be CSR. Now, typical grant making, you are used to sort of giving the money upfront, right? Like, to wait for results to come and to tie your money to results requires you to take certain level of uncertainty, which we may not be used to just yet. So this is a structure that works well when the outcome funder says, I need to spend my money upfront and I'm willing to do so. However, that then means that, again, there is a risk involved in that, right? To mitigate that risk, sorry, I'm just going to move my slide. To mitigate that risk, we have the guarantor. So the way the structure works is the outcome funder gives the money to the implementation partner. Performance managers here, remember the four parameters that I showed you, the 4 tenets I showed you. So performance managers here, implementation partner goes ahead and delivers the intervention. The evaluator evaluates whether the outcomes are met or not. And once they certify that the outcomes are met, there is a guarantor. The guarantor comes in later. So the outcome funder and guarantor have swapped places. And the guarantor pays back the outcome funder if there has been an underperformance. So it's almost like a money back guarantee. Outcomes nahi hua, we will return your money, right? So it still gives you a bigger bang for buck because you do have that sort of focus on outcomes, and you do have that little linkage to outcomes to say if they're not met, you can get the money back. Now, in India, you'll ask me, CSR can't take money back. So how does this work, right? This is notional. There are ways of structuring it. The money didn't hit your books. It can be given out to another non-profit if there is underperformance. It can be pulled back into the same program if you kind of doing it in that way. So there are ways of doing it. But the idea is that if you want upfront sort of spending to happen, then this is a good structure. The other tenets remain the same. Outcomes, payments are linked to outcomes, performance manager, independent evaluation, sorry, I've forgotten the 4th one now. Anyway, but and reducing the risk on the implementation partner. Again, implementation partner here is not bearing any risk. I'm going to move on to the 3rd one. It's a social success note. I'll ask Ria to put the link to the playbook that Asha Impact and Andy created. This is a debt-based structure. So this is when your implementation partner is a for-profit organization or has a good revenue model, because it needs to have the ability to take debt and repay debt, right? So it's a social enterprise. Think of a company that's delivering edtech, or think of a company that has a solar solution for something, right? A small and sort of medium business, an SME. Now we all know for them, access to credit is a massive issue, and access to timely, affordable, suitable credit, which allows them to also meet their social sort of theory of change or impact thesis along with financials, right? So we're talking about that kind of credit. It's a nuanced form of credit. We know that that could be in short supply. So there's an investor who says, okay, I'll give you a loan. There's a performance manager who's telling the social enterprise, I'll help you deliver, don't worry. The social enterprise goes and does its thing. It has, solar powered pumps, for example. It installs that, you reduce your carbon footprint, you increase the productivity for a farmer, whatever it is. The evaluator comes in and it verifies, that the results are met. Based on that, an outcome funder comes in and it then repays the investor. Now, there are permutations, combinations, right? So it's a loan. So I can actually repay the principal. The social enterprise can repay the principal and the outcome funder can take on the interest. The outcome funder can subvent the interest because as a reward for your good performance, because you've met your social impact. Different things can happen. You can do partial, you can do full. But the idea is that it's a debt-based structure. And again, Varthna is something where in India, we've actually executed this quite well and successfully. The last structure is simply a pay-for-performance grant. This is, again, very simple in the sense that there is some amount of upfront working capital that the outcome funder gives to the implementation partner. There's a performance manager. The implementation partner delivers, the evaluator evaluates. Based on the results, the remaining payment is released. This, in its plain vanilla form, is how all grant making works in India, or majority of grant making works in India today. The two kind of slight differentiators are that you have independent evaluation and there is a performance manager, right? So those two remain the thing. In this case, the implementation partner may have to bear a little bit of a risk. And that is again based on the fact whether the implementation partner is large enough to do that. If not, you convert this into a DIB structure and you bring in a risk investor to bear that risk so that the implementation partner is risk-free, right?
Honestly, is there a 4 here? I'm sorry, can you just go back to the last chart? Sorry. Where is 4?
Right at the top, Ramraj, payment on results, remaining funding.
Okay. Achha.
1 and 4.
It's a two-part circle. Yeah. Actually, before you go on, I think there is one important question which I think will be useful to answer, which is really that when the investor gives the money and later he gets back the money from the outcome funder, does the investor get paid any interest, or is there an incentive? Why should the investor do all this? Obviously, I'm presuming he's making money off this, right? So can you maybe clarify that to the audience?
Yes, you're right. I mean, there is a reward for bearing that risk, right, of non-delivery. He stands to lose his money if the implementation partner doesn't deliver. So there is a small reward built in. It's quite modest, at least in India, it has been quite modest. Globally, I think Abha will have a better sense. But you're right, there is a return involved, so to speak. I know we're running out of time.
The return also covers costs. Many investors bear the cost of PMU, they bear the cost of the time value of money, they bear the cost of currency risk, depending on whether they're global. And they also bear the cost of reputation, something which is very hard to cost. In some cases, so I mean, we have now divided up those various risks when we do the valuation for these. If it's a more innovative project, we would normally see a more higher risk return, higher return to investors, or a more difficult one. If it's a slightly more stable group of providers, we would expect a lower return to be paid to investors. As market matures, that will start coming together with these deals now becoming second, third, fourth deals.
Yeah, Anushri, go ahead.
I'm going to take 2 minutes on this slide. The whole idea of this slide is to prove that DIBs can work, right? I'm not saying they always work. This is Quality Education India Development Impact Bond that we had floated. It's completed 4 years. It has delivered fantastic results. I've included the results here, and we've also done a comparison of how these implementation partners performed under a DIB structure and under their normal grant structure, right? So we actually realized that they performed with comparable interventions and, sort of similar types of outcomes. They performed better. They delivered 50% better outcomes under the DIB as compared to a normal grant structure that they were used to doing it, right? And a lot of that is attributed to that performance management piece that I was talking about, because they had that kind of support.
Yeah, let me add to that, Anushri and Ramraj, is that 2 years of the DIB, the QEI DIB schools were closed because of COVID. But what the outcome funders and the investors decided was education happens whether a child is at school or not at school. So let us continue the funding and ask them to pivot their models to community and tech and a combination of all of that, and see where the learning outcomes exist the same. We actually reduced the target a little bit to see if that would be needed. They actually outperformed their previous targets as well. So really interesting data we have coming out of QEI in terms of, despite COVID, children learning, keeping cohorts in school. So just to give you a sort of sense of how robust it can be.
Okay, fast forward.
Matilda coming in as well here. Matilda, do you want to say something?
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
Yes, Abha, I agree with you. If you look at even the first ever pay for outcome model by IndusInd Bank, the first ever CSR funding to leverage outcome payments, especially in early literacy, even during COVID, because of a tiered governance structure of a project steering committee, etc., to ensure resilience and course correction during the COVID period when the entire country was under lockdown and the schools were the most affected, education sector was the most affected. we also pivoted. The entire project steering committee had a call for action and looked at low cost technology and moved into a hybrid model in terms of an online learning plus trained community volunteers. And there was Har Ghar School initiative in Haryana where the project was implemented. And during that period, we saw that there was 30% more enrollment because the other private schools had totally stopped, operations there in Haryana. So with a very strong governance and a tiered project steering committee, we can pivot the program when it comes to, multi-stakeholder engagement, which is a very critical aspect of development impact bond. Even the performance of the project during the COVID, we saw that the learning outcomes, just to have some broad numbers here, basically improved drastically in the state of Haryana.
No, thanks for that, Matilda. I think again just goes to prove, I think we are now generating a body of evidence around these instruments to say they work. Like I said, it's obviously dependent on the context, dependent on the power of that coalition. And I mean, APA often says the currency for these transactions is not money, it's trust, right? And it's that shared vision. And I know it sounds philosophical and idealistic, but that's what kind of takes you through these difficult times when decisions have to be made on the fly and, egos and logos don't clash. They just sort of, it all comes together. So I'll take another 2 minutes to walk you through another structure. This is a relatively new structure. It's an impact bond again. It's the Skills Impact Bond. We launched it last year with National Skills Development Corporation and MSDF as investors, and a group of outcome funders, including JSW Foundation. And I'll let Abhishek talk a little bit more about his own motivation and experience. But broadly, the outcomes that we are really chasing through this is placement and retention. And it was born out of the fact that the skilling ecosystem worked quite well in India. It's a mature sector, but the focus has been on enrollment, training, and then maybe certification and placement. But we've not really looked at retention, or we've looked at retention, but we've not sort of solved that puzzle of how to get young people to stay in their jobs, right? So that was the reason why we thought an impact bond may be useful, because otherwise grants did a perfectly adequate job of actually getting people trained and placed. Some design innovations that I will quickly touch upon. So like I was saying, patience is obviously in short supply, and for good reason for a lot of funders and investors. So we have a cohort-wise design. It allows us to actually the financial model to recycle quickly, but more importantly, it gives flexibility to the implementation partner within the boundaries set for each cohort. So each cohort is 6 months, and you have very clear timelines around that. Within that, each implementation partner can do its own thing. They can run a training program for 1 month, 2 months. They can keep enrolling. They can close enrollment in 90 days. All of that flexibility is given. The idea is never to micromanage the partner, right? So that's one thing that we did. It also allows learnings to happen iteratively. So one cohort's learning influences the targets for the next cohort, and so on and so forth. It also helped us launch, because generally the criticism for DIBs are that they take too long to launch. This design allowed us to launch because cohort 1 was a learning cohort. We said it's okay if we don't have all the data. It's okay if we don't have all the answers. Let's do it. Let's learn while we're doing it. Let cohort 1 be a learning cohort, and then we can revisit some of our assumptions at the end of it. The other very interesting thing we've done on this is the sliding scale. So remember I said percentage of money that is linked to outcomes. We realized that if at the very beginning we tie a very big proportion of money to our main outcome, which is retention, the system may not be ready for it. There's a lot of risk on that, right? The IPs are not ready. They haven't figured out their processes, etc. So we said, okay, let's do a sliding scale. Let's gradually get to that ambition or the aspiration. So the first year or the first cohort sliding scale looks very close to what they are used to. And then gradually over the years and over cohorts, we push them and we nudge them and we move them towards that aspirational stage. Another way of designing this so that you're mitigating risk and you're allowing the learning to happen in a very iterative format. And the last thing I want to pick up on this is that evaluation process. Another sort of common criticism, evaluation costs more than actual program execution. Not true. It depends on how you structure your evaluation. In India, unfortunately, because we don't have very strong, regular, reliable, robust public data, government data, we generally have to collect our own data, which increases our cost. Outside India, in advanced countries, they depend a lot on government data. Now, in this project, we don't have a control group. We said it's almost impossible for us to constitute a control group. But the outcome funders were like, how do we pay if impact is not attributed to my training? That person could have got a job because of XYZ reason. Why should I pay for that? So attribution is key in an impact bond. And we said, okay, in our design, in our intervention design, and the way we defined our outcome metrics, attribution was actually covered in that. So we said, I don't need a control group. I don't need some very complicated research methodology. A simple definitional and an intervention design tweak meant that we know that the first job is because of us or because of the intervention. I am going to stop here. I know we are sort of running out of time. I think I just want to reiterate this, and you will hear all of us talk about this. And really, these are the key takeaways. If you have to forget all the mumbo jumbo and just remember 4 things, these are the 4 things: that be problem-led, right? And impact first. There is now evidence that these tools actually work, and there is now evidence that they also lead to other types of ecosystem improvements, cost efficiency, value for money. It is not a one glove fits all, and I can't sort of emphasize this enough, and that all of this can be made compliant with the regulations. With that, I am actually going to stop sharing. And I'm going to just very quickly introduce, you've already heard from Matilda and Abhishek, but let me do a quick sort of introduction to both of them. And then we can actually have, a nice conversation with Abha facilitating it. And really hear from the horse's mouth rather than us as to what their experiences have been. So Abhishek is the Chief Strategy Officer at JSW Foundation. He's been in the development sector for more than 20 years, worked with NGOs, corporates, the Big Four consulting firms, and he comes with extensive experience of the entire CSR life cycle, right from designing, program management, strategy, compliance, stakeholder management, system strengthening, and M&E. So please, any and all CSR questions for Abhishek. Similarly, we also have Matilda Lobo, who heads CSR at IndusInd Bank. Matilda has had a very interesting journey, more than 20-25 years of experience in the corporate sector with banking and financial services. Her core strength really are strategic planning, business development, project management. And she transitioned to the social sector in 2018, where she endeavors to use some of her core strengths in financial services and banking to actually support nonprofit organizations on connecting the various dots between the IndusInd corporate body and fundraising, partnership, capacity planning, and process improvement. So with that very quick introduction, I'm going to hand it over to Abha to take us through this really interesting piece of conversation with our guest speakers. Abha,
sure. So when we were preparing for this, when I heard Abhishek and Matilda sound off each other, we thought we must have them sound off each other with you all. I'm going to speak less and let Matilda and Abhishek speak more because they really are the ones with the experience. Matilda, first you're a banker. There are several bankers in the room, and we can do without our pictures. I think, Anushree, it's terrible to look at oneself on Zoom anyway, than to have a photograph as well to torment us. Matilda, you've been, you're a banker. There are several bankers in the room. They think like you. They're thinking about return. Talk to us about impact and return coming together. It's not an easy thing for a banker, right, to make this journey and to understand when you price impact. There's a complexity that is not there when you're pricing whether a borrower is going to give a loan back. So talk to us, Matilda, as a banker and as an impact professional.
Yes. So of course, I had an interesting journey. I basically decided to drop everything down when I was at the peak of my career in corporate finance and decided to transition to the development sector. The whole idea of this transition was that when you look at the NGO space, right, the third pillar, the civil society pillar, the entire heart is there. They are working very hard on social issues. But at the same time, when at the corporate side, you have the CSR funding, how can we marry the two so that we can stretch the CSR money to get a better social ROI, right? Use also CSR as a magnet, because the public funding or the funding which is there at the government's end, how do we attract that funding into the projects for a large scale disruptive impact? So that was the entire thought process of moving to CSR, because it's a privilege actually to man a very high corpus, a 100+ crore corpus, and how do we channelize it for social good when actually there's a need in the country. So there are a lot of projects happening within the impact space, but the funding happens where there's a social entrepreneur, he has a problem statement identified and there's a solutioning. But here there was an opportunity as CSR, and how can you marry impact investing in terms of larger social issues using convergence and collaboration to resolve some of these issues. So
great. I want to come back to you, Matilda, and then pick up a little bit on why these tools as a second question. But Abhishek, similar question to you. You know these nonprofits. I've been in the field with you. I've seen you grill them. What's been your experience now? You've been with this first skill impact bond, much of your technical expertise from the past fed into the design. Talk to us about before and after, and where you see perhaps changes, and how your career of work in this perhaps has been challenged or even enhanced by some of these experiences, or even not enhanced, even the negatives, so the good and the bad and the ugly.
Sure. Thank you, Abha. And I would like to thank Anushri. Anushri, I think you have set expectations too high, by giving my introductions to the team. But, frankly speaking, I will be very candid and I will be very frank and honest. From the time I have traversed this journey on skill impact bond, I'm now only thinking about this model. Honestly, I think my team is, I don't know whether they will retain me or not, but, they are always, when any project we are conceptualizing, I'm pushing hard for these models. I think what I see, I'm very positive in the sense I see this model is a way forward for the development sector, because all of us who have been in the sector 20+ years, me, myself, I have seen such an ups and downs, and working with implementation partners, sometimes, just be very conservative and be patient at the input level, at the activity level, at the output level. I think the outcomes level, we started thinking very late. And this particular model's solution is helping us think beyond outputs, helping us thinking about outcomes, about impact. And so this is something excites us, and I believe this is a way forward. We had great learnings, from why we ventured into a Skill India Impact Bond, and because we, as GSW Foundation, we have been doing this intervention for last 14 years, having our own skill schools, a lot of permutations, combinations we tried, good results, negative results, positive results, everything we saw. But I think what we were not very confident about, how do we push towards retention, how do we push towards placements. And in one of the, when Anushri was speaking, she says, that implementation partners, there's no risk for them, and but there's no financial risk for them. But I think these kinds of intervention are making them more rigor. They are bringing in rigor in their own approach. They are bringing in rigor in their own process of how to implement the project. And I had this conversation with the implementation partners of the Skill India Impact Bond. I asked a very simple question. You were doing this for very long. What change you see when you are with us now? They said, now we are more focused. When we look at trainers, even selection of the trainers, even selection of the candidates, we are taking it more serious. I think that seriousness in the system, the seriousness within everybody, I think that is something changing this entire ecosystem.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you a slightly complex one. You are champions within your organizations, but you have boards, CSR committees, peers, other programmatic colleagues. Talk to us and perhaps to the audience, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions that will come at the back of this, about the complexities of navigating what seems so different from business as usual, because you're still sort of early adopters, right? Talk to us about that, so perhaps other participants can come in and ask. And Ramraj, I'll bring you in. You've been asking the right questions. You've been saying they're the first order ones, but perhaps you may want to build on that question. So, Matilda, you want to go first, and then Abhishek do respond to that.
Very important to align with the overall CSR strategy and the policy of the organization. And it is very critical that you have sponsorship within the organization in terms of your senior management, your CSR committee, and board members. So for us, if I look at IndusInd Bank's journey, the CSR journey has evolved, with the CSR mandate. And way back in 2018-19, we transitioned to more of a long-term, outcome-based, convergence, collaborative approach to CSR. And this was supported by the then ex-CEO, Paul Abraham. Then you had the earlier erstwhile CSR head, Advait Hebar, and the strategic program leader, Riddhi. So they took across this entire depth to the management. Obviously, when they are looking at structures like this, which is long-term, especially when you mentioned about the evaluation cost, right? It's quite a big portion of the entire project. You need to basically justify saying that it results in a better cost efficiency over a period of time. And most important is that what are the primary objectives that you're aligning on this particular dip? For us, the primary outcomes were one-fold, is to improve the learning outcomes for the students in Haryana. It was a large-scale project, around 125,000 students in grade 1 and grade 2, spread across close to 3,400 schools in around 7 districts. One of them was six of them IndusInd Bank and one by SBI Foundation. So this was a primary objective. But when you're looking at long-term systemic change, when you're looking at how we can pilot an outcome-based, model, impact-bound model, which will basically be a differentiator going forward in the ecosystem. So this was another secondary objectives of the bank. The other one was that how do we get better social ROI and value for money? So this was the second, because with a multi-donor, a large-scale project, you see that there is a cost efficiency which comes in over a period of time. The initial cost is higher. The other great objective was that how do we get philanthropic capital to basically commit for the downside or the performance risk. The last one is that how do we ensure that IndusInd Bank can influence policy level changes. So these are the critical objectives when we could showcase this across to the sponsors and the CSR board, that we could manage to get their buy-in. But definitely, like I said, resilience or the risk of failure of the project. For that, what we ensured is that there was a proof of concept which was already showcased by Central Square Foundation and by Learning Language Foundation. So they had a one-year project in one district where they showcased the outcomes. And after that, the Haryana government decided to adopt this model of a new pedagogy, which is also an innovative structure in the remaining 7 districts in Haryana. And that's where IndusInd Bank decided to come on board as an outcome payer along with SBI Foundation. So it's somehow the entire thing tied in with the CSR policy and the strategy of the organization. It was also critical to tie in with stakeholders who have a similar vision and mission for India when it comes to the FLN agenda of the country, right? The foundational literacy and numeracy agenda. And Central Square Foundation has been working on this mission because they're part of the overall Ashoka University group. And Language Learning Foundation also has been working in the space of education. So it's very critical that you have the right partner who have the ability to deliver large-scale, projects. And most critical for us here is that can this project then be taken and replicated in the remaining part of the state, or then create a contextualization in other geographies? So I think I've taken too much of.
No, not at all. Matilda, thank you. Ramraj, did you want to come in before Abhishek talks about the journey of CSR committees and internal approvals?
Yeah. So I was, in fact, just going to ask that question only, that how did Abhishek as well as Matilda, really convince the subcommittees of the board?
Sure.
And I think they are, very high quality people, but I, whether it is in your organization or any other organization, but invariably there is always a concern that you just sort of, do the right thing, just stay within the why. Har cheez mein innovation karne ki kya zarurat hai is a tendency that may be there or that will be there. So I just wanted Matilda, for you specifically, one question, and Abha for you one question, and I think be useful, especially because Matilda, you come from the debt side of the market, in your past. So essentially the whole game is really over a period of time, you have to get more outcome funders, but it's also that you have to get more risk investors, because otherwise, this market is not going to develop unless we going to get risk investors.
Yes.
I'm sure, as we have all seen, and also in the audience, as we see the people, you do see that risk investors carry a decent amount of risk, because there is a risk of that guy actually doing what he's supposed to do, the implementation partner, then that market in which you're trying to do an intervention, hopefully everything doesn't change there. Like COVID could be a great example. So from a pure play debt perspective, and my background is also in debt, so you will appreciate this is there is risk here. I mean, it's not a BAU, regular kind of shop.
Yeah.
So, what is it that we can do?
So Ramraj, actually, I am going to get Abhishek to answer this question. I think Abhishek, maybe pick both questions up and then Matilda can come, because I know you're thinking differently around risk investment, right? Yes. Do you want to pick up Ramraj's point, then Matilda can bring?
I mean, really the question is, how do I get NBFCs and how do I get banks? Particularly because a lot of the risk investors not just doing risk investing, but there's also this capacity building and the program management and so it's a kind of a larger package. And how should we really pitch this? Or is there a different bunch of people to whom we should be pitching this?
Great question.
That's a quick high-level question. Yeah.
I think Ramraj, to be very honest, I would like now the corporate foundations also to be part of the risk investment now. And honestly, we are thinking about it. We are just, discussing and taking legal opinion how, as a risk investor, because money will flow back to us, and it will always be shown as spent in that financial year as a CSR as per the law. But we are looking at, and we probably also would like to take this up to the MCA, as an industry CSR representation, that how this can be a little flexible, and as foundations under CSR, we can play that role. Honestly, over the years, with our interventions, we have taken a lot of risk. The only thing is we have not got that money back. We have taken risk, whether we failed. If we have to take risk, and we have also taken in the past, why can't we take risk in a model which is foolproof and which is also giving us some sort of a, very innovative and scaled intervention. So that is, and we are having this discussion in fact, just to, Abha asked this question, in fact, when we put, when we were discussing this with our leaders, senior leaders and a CSR committee, I think this question came to us. Can foundation also be a risk investor? So this question also was asked at the time when we were pitching for outcome funder as JSW Foundation.
Yeah,
Matilda, you want to say anything on that?
Yes.
Then I will ask. Then I will.
Yes, I agree with Abhishek. Especially within the CSR world, when CSR is parked within the parent company, it's very different compared to when it's a foundation, because it's a separate implementing agency, and they can also come in as risk investor, which I think we should be taking it up with MCA in terms of some leeway, because we were anyways picking up the risk on a grant making model, right? But apart from that, where I see maybe banks or other organizations who are coming with the debt capital coming in, and the pricing for risk can come through philanthropic capital. So where you're talking, which is unrestricted, where they can pick up that portion of the pricing for risk, which maybe a traditional bank or any organization which is funding the debt would not want to pick up. So the way of structure, we could have CSR coming in with the funding, either through the foundation or standalone parent CSR. And you can have the philanthropist organizations, which are not tied directly with the CSR law and are not restricted by the CSR law, basically picking up that pricing risk or the risk of loss there. And you will have the outcome funders from the CSR.
So Ramraj, I'll add a question. Eventually, if the market has to grow, it can go two ways. Is that some set of funders think we want to take risks, this could include banks and NBFCs, The risk has better pricing, which is when banks will come in some scale. It's suboptimal scale right now, let's be honest, for that market to come in. So philanthropy is still doing it. The other way is that philanthropy overall takes risk and the government takes on the outcome role. Now, to that, the journey is that the procurement guidelines for government change, enabling them to partner, as we've done in the PPP sector, with private sector like this or with CSR like this. That could be a future way if regulators and others allow us. That will require a certain level of regulatory barrier, helping the regulator think about these barriers and thinking about where they need risk and showing them how there is evidence that there is value for money and cost savings. I think that's a longer journey. As we do that, the market will divide into the risk takers and those who want surety of outcomes. And we're seeing energy on all sides of the spectrum and people thinking about all of their rules based on internal capabilities, skill sets, risk appetite, time value of money, all those sorts of parameters. Hopefully that helps, Ramraj.
So that will be more on the social impact bonds, which will is going forward, where you will have maybe the government or the local bodies basically picking up the risk going forward, and where CSR or philanthropy can pay up front the money.
Going back to
Abha, one question for me you had about our
Yes, about your internal experience. Just going back to that, Abhishek, do you want to share, because there are people here who are doing similar?
Yeah, sure. In fact, I think Ramraj, the first question that you asked, when we started the session, how this is different. I think that's exactly the same question we had from our CSR committee. Out of 2-3 things, they were wanted to hear back from us. The first question came to us is is it a check cutting? Are we just giving funds, or do we have any say in the entire process? And we all know, since right from day zero, I think when we were involved in this discussion, the iterations, we managed to convince that it's not just a check cutting. We have been part of the design. We were part of the monitoring, everything. We will play that role. So I think that sense, that confidence from us to the CSR committee helped us sail through. Other thing is very big question about the compliance piece. If outcomes are not achieved and you have provisioned that funds, what will you do? How will you manage this? Because you have already provisioned that funds. So what we said is we will have some backups with us, in terms of when we go to the board, if we have 100 rupees, we will take approval for 120. And we'll say, we assume that 20, if something happens, outcomes are not achieved, funds not, it's payout not happening, then we have some provision for us to at least meet that piece. So I think these kinds of little complexity. And fourth important thing, what we said is scale, efficiency, and innovation. I think these 3 keywords, these 3 things helped us. And last, Matilda, you also mentioned about policy level changes, I think. So we are now partnering at a national level within a program, which may bring in some changes. It will help the ecosystem grow. It will help create us a model, and where JSW is also a partner. I think these 4 or 5 things help us.
Any challenges either from audit committee, legal, any issues that you faced, or was it all smooth sailing?
Legal, I think there were lots and lots of discussions, yes, but the only concern area was about the first of all, see, one piece I would like to say, there's some payout happens for the administrative cost, but the program delivery is not happening. How do you manage that? Because if what reports we are going to share with the board, if we are not getting that results from the process managers or the British Asian Trust, in fact, for this program. So we had some sort of a flexibility in that. Okay, for first cohort, we will have some arrangement, but from next cohort onwards, the program delivery reports will be there, and there will be a movement in the program. So that those questions, whether because questions of audit generally, when we bring in any funds, if they have to pay out, that question comes, where is the report? What is happening on the project? You are just paying for the administrative cost, These kinds of questions we managed to resolve because only for the first cohort we took that flexibility.
So Ramraj, we're at time, and I realize that hopefully
I just want to make a small point here. I mean, this is just a random thought which I had. I think it'll be good for us either to do separately an event or maybe some case studies on innovation in development financing. We see a lot of discussion on innovation in program execution. Somebody executed a fantastic project in health or in education. There is very little narrative today, even in public or in the media, around innovation in development finance. And I think right from development education upwards, I think this is an area which gets very little attention. So I think somewhere, we should create, what say an Abhishek or an Matilda or somebody else has gone through to create this. How are we going to make this? How are we going to create aspirationality around something like this? I'm not sure.
I'm aligned with you, because there are many voices now. There aren't one or two, and they all have their own experiences, which are very rich and worth sharing. So we will pick that up with you, Ramraj.
I would suggest that we should do something separate on this, because otherwise, the whole idea of social sector is always around the asset side of the balance sheet. You're always in execution mode. You did this fantastic project in Chhattisgarh. No questions about it. But something great done on the liability side, which is on the, the funding side of the balance sheet, very rarely gets that sort of value. And I think maybe separately, Abha, we can discuss around how do we build this narrative and how do we enable people to see that this innovation is also innovation, because effectively our CSR capital, in my view, Abha, and I'm sorry I'm going on this one, is really development capital for innovation. If I as a CSR head can look at this money, maybe 90% for regular execution, can I put 10% as innovation capital?
Correct.
Some of it for execution, some of it for funding, financing. I think will be a very empowered way to look at it. Because
I think that's a big idea there, Ramraj, because I think in solving development challenges, the problem is also always, as you said, with the executor. Nobody asks, is money doing it badly? Nobody says money is doing it badly, or money is disincentivizing results. And if anything, the pay for results conversation is about money asking itself, am I doing a good job? Am I doing a job at all? And it's therefore a very, very exciting place where CSR can be partners in saying, make money work, because we care, we are private sector.
Discuss. There may be other case studies. So can I have 10 leaders who have done something fantastic on the funding side? I mean, today you hear about somebody getting President's Award for a fantastic project on execution. Can we aspire that somebody will get a project or get this thing because they did something great on funding?
Tell you what, Ramraj, every partner I've worked with in every organization, I would give them an award for what they do internally. They are such champions, and how they think through the problems is, I've never seen anything like that before in the funding landscape.
Let me stop now and let you continue, Amma. Sorry about that.
No, we're finishing. We're actually over time. Thank you to all the sort of 50, 60, 70 people who were with us all the way through. I hope we answered most of your questions. And there are a few which I want to come back with a more nuanced answer, and hopefully IIC will enable that. Matilda and Abhishek, thank you so much, and Ramraj, for being honest, candid, like no gloves off conversation. So really love that. Thank you.
Abha, can I take a moment, please?
Yes, please, of course.
So, it was very critical for us. We have just completed 3 years of our development impact bond, which is the Pay for Success, in July 2022. And the first-hand report from the evaluator has shown that the outcomes have been surpassed. And so that's a great win for us. One, we are waiting for the final evaluation report to be out and will be publicly, shared. But the most important success of the program is that this laid the foundation of the FLN program in the state. LLF, the implementing partner, signed up a MOU with the state of Haryana to support the design and implementation of this DIP in the state in all 22 districts, covering around 6 lakh students, grade 1 and grade 2 students, covering around 35,000 teachers every year till 2026 in 8,609 schools. So this is a very big win, right? Which started at one district with 175 schools, with the interventions in 3 years on the Pay for Success model, which covered 7 districts, 3,400 schools and 1,25,000 students, now is going ahead with all 22 districts. And most important is that this again fed into the Nipun Bharat initiative of the country. So a good structure doesn't only bring in cost efficiency or a better outcome, but it results in influencing policy decision making, which will basically move the needle when it comes to the development sector. Yeah.
Well, the product speaks for itself, Ramraj. We don't need sales when you have products that talk for themselves. So back to Tisha. If I'm going to say your name really wrong, I'm going to hand back to you. So
yeah, thank you so much. So now that we're at the end of the webinar, I would like to thank Abhishek, Matilda, Abha, and Anushri for some very engaging and practical insights into the pay for results model. And we do hope to continue this journey of learning with you and IBFC. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the audience for their participation and general enthusiasm in asking questions, and obviously Ramraj for jumping in and putting them through, which really helped us make the masterclass much more relevant and engaging. So as we close, I would like to share the link to the website where you can find more information on the IBFC newsletter, which features case studies as well as interviews and op-eds by blended finance experts. Thank you again, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you all at the next IBFC Masterclass very, very soon.